Hello, I'm Donald Macaulay, and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we talk to the key opinion leaders in health and medicine around the world. Today I'm in Canada and I'm talking to Alan Katz. But Alan, to say you're in Canada is not the whole story because you qualified in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Indeed. I've been in Canada for over 30 years now, close to 40. But as you say, I grew up and did my medical training in Cape Town. This was during the apartheid years. And this had a profound impact on me, my life, my values, and where I have landed. I knew from probably my late teens that I was living in a society that was unjust, that the oppression that apartheid brought was just not something I could support. I was benefiting from this and had a lot of guilt about that. And my colleague, we had a choice. Those of us who opposed apartheid at that time, if we stayed and fought apartheid, the likelihood was that we'd land up in trouble with the law as it stood. This was a police society. And to be honest, as a white South African, I had this understanding this wasn't my battle. I was part of the problem, not the solution. So once I graduated, I looked to leave the country, and we spent 4 months initially in rural Canada, working in a village of 500 people, really with the intent of earning some money to travel, my wife and I and our 6-month-old daughter. And we fell in love with Canada. What we fell in love with was a society that seemed to strive for equality, for equal opportunity. The healthcare system really was the key factor, that the single payer system in Canada provided care to people based on need, not based on what you could afford. There was apparently, at that stage, in my understanding, no discrimination. That is, as I've learned over the years, not the case. It's not quite that simple, but that's been an important part of my journey too.
So that journey brought you to Manitoba, but of course you've done a lot of work looking at the life and health of the First Nations. That sounds as if it resonates with your background.
Absolutely. So I became aware of, through interaction with First Nations people, of significant discrimination, racism, the impact of colonialism. So as I said a few minutes ago, I thought I was coming to a country where opportunity was equal, and I had no understanding of the residential school system, its impact on First Nations, the intergenerational trauma, the ongoing racism within our healthcare system. And I have vivid memories of really bad things happening to First Nations people in emergency rooms, and the outcry around discrimination, and thinking, well, was that really discrimination, or was that basically somebody who had some real problems and the emergency room didn't respond appropriately? And as my understanding grew, I grew to understand that the lack of appropriate response was in fact racism, and that there is still significant racism in the system, which led me to put more energy into those relationships, into understanding where that racism comes from, but more importantly, to understanding the impact on the experience of First Nations people. And it is profound. It is something that it's really hard for a white settler to understand. And I work hard to understand it, but to, more importantly, do the little things that I can do to make other people aware of the impacts. And that's been a big piece of the research that I try and do now.
And based on that research and on your experience and knowledge, what's the future? How can Canada improve healthcare for the Indigenous people in the future?
I am hopeful, based on talking to people who have a good understanding, First Nations people who have a good understanding of the reality. But I think there's a significant awakening of an activism on the part of First Nations, because really I cannot speak for First Nations. I have no right to do that. But First Nations people are speaking out on their own behalf much more vigorously, and they're proposing solutions. And it really is, to a large extent, I will say, publicizing and engaging with greater awareness of racism, of its impact. At the same time, an improvement in the socioeconomic status and education level of First Nations people themselves. They are going to bring about this change through their actions. This is not something I can do for them, and I have never intended to do that. But I will say that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada, which was a federal commission looking into the impact predominantly on the residential schools on First Nations people. So here's a bit of my history coming back. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in my mind, was the South African one, led by Reverend Tutu, and had a profound impact on removing the true hatred between blacks and whites in South Africa. It really was quite profound what it did. And it was really about people describing what they had done and getting forgiveness for that, for admitting to it. The Canadian experience was very different. And I initially thought that the Canadian experience wouldn't have the same impact until I interacted with a few First Nations elders who said, it's up to you now. You're responsible, and obviously you in general, for the harms. So you have to correct some of those harms. And that message, I think, is now reverberating within Canada. About 10 years ago, I was at a meeting, and it was in British Columbia, where First Nations communities have a lot more power due to being socioeconomically not as in such dire circumstances as they are in Manitoba. And the meeting started off with a land acknowledgement. And this was a new phenomenon to me, and I had no idea where it came from or what impact it would have. And I do not start a single meeting outside of my own research group without a land acknowledgement now. And that's the kind of change that's happening amongst white Canadians in terms of understanding our place in this country. Yes, it's a wonderful country. It's a great country to live in, but boy, have we got a long way to go to fix some of the harms that were done in previous generations. And I will say, and I say it in my land acknowledgement all the time, that those harms are continuing. So we've got to fix that, and that's what my land acknowledgement talks about. It's not the ritual acknowledgement that everybody reads out and says, you know, all these harms from the past. There are harms happening now, and our job is to try and work to change that.
I'm incredibly impressed with your work in that field, Alan, and really, we've got to acknowledge that. But there's something else I'd like to ask you about, and that is your incredible research career. I've been so impressed by what you've done. And let's be honest, it hasn't been easy to do it in Manitoba, but you have really forged a tremendous research career. What's been the secret?
So I would say that there are two things that I can put my success down if there is any success. The one is I had the good fortune to rub shoulders with my research mentor, who's Nora Roos. So Dr. Roos was the founder of the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy. Interesting story of her own. Political scientist, really, who came from the US to Manitoba because of the data that we have in Manitoba and have had, and for over 30 years we've been collecting administrative data. And she saw the wealth of this data and the opportunity that it brought, and then the opportunity that it brought within the healthcare system. And early on in my academic career, I was asked to join the research ethics board at the university. And that's where I met Nora Lou. And that's where we became, I will say, colleagues, in the sense that she saw something in me that she respected. And I certainly saw the opportunities of working with her. and she recruited me to the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy, which was really the opening to my research career. I think what she saw in me, and this is the second point I would say, is somebody who is a reflective and critical thinker. And I know where that came from. That came from my upbringing in South Africa. That came from coming home every day and wondering what the heck is going on here, and how do we deal with this, and how do we change this, and what did I do today that may have been a good thing, and what did I do today that I could have done differently that would have been a better thing.
So tell me about the collaborations you've built up, because that is clearly one of the foundations on which you've built this career.
When I joined the Department of Family Medicine at the University of Manitoba, there was no active research. And I didn't have any mentors, which was why Dr. Roos was so important to me from the Department of Community Health Sciences. But I started going to meetings like NACRAG, and I met like-minded people there. And we got talking. I also became very engaged with the College of Family Physicians of Canada and met people there that I respected immensely, that taught me so much. And, you know, I think back now about people like Rick Glazier, that is a tower of achievement and strength, and in primary care research in North America, not just in Canada. And I remember going to a meeting of the research department, and Rick wasn't active in the research department specifically at that time, but he came to the meeting and spoke to us. And I kind of thought, gee, there's an interesting guy. And, you know, you meet these people, you just learn what they've, you know, how smart they are, how much they've got to offer. And somehow, surreptitiously or through somebody else, you meet, you rub shoulders a little closer, and you start working together. You know, people like Brian Hutchison, once again, somebody who's done so much over the years. So it's all about doing little things, and then other people reaching out and saying, okay, are you interested in working on this? Or me reaching out and saying, are you interested in working in something like that? I've been very fortunate. It really, I had an experience of working with somebody who said, you know, it's not about planning a research career over 20 years and then implementing it. It's about taking advantage of opportunities. And that really has been a big part of what I've been fortunate to be able to do. And that's been my success in funding very often too. It's, gee, there's an opportunity that really speaks to me, and it's so difficult to get CIHR funding, but this is something that just, it looks like it's almost intended for me. So I'm going to go for that one and put together a team to apply for that. And lo and behold, that's been quite successful for me.
And to the future for family medicine, it's coming under quite a lot of pressure at the moment. And I know you've done work on, for example, consultation behavior. Where do you see family medicine going in the future?
Now, family medicine in Canada is at a bit of a crossroads, I would say. And one of the unique things about family medicine in Canada is the multiple roles that the College of Family Physicians plays, in that there are 6 organizations in the US that do the work that one organization in Canada does. So, you know, it clearly is a large organization and has had different divisions and is divided into these different categories and have people working on all of them. But that has led to, I would say, over the years, a little bit of lack of innovation because of the size and lack of focus. And at the same time now, I'm seeing some evolution that's coming out of the organization, and I think this is a good thing, and I think it's bringing us as family physicians and our discipline to the table in terms of the need for change. There are many family physicians who, up to a few years ago, were practicing in the same way for the last 30 years. And the pressure is based on that, and the pressure is based on the fact that the lack of evolution in family medicine in Canada has meant that we haven't kept up with the needs of society. And Canada has, our healthcare system has, in my view, not been primary care focused. And Barbara Starfield did so much work on this. And, once again, when you find somebody and you see the work of somebody like that, and she was not a direct mentor of mine. I met her twice, and I met Ian McWhinney twice. But these are people that you read their work, and it just speaks to you in a way that you can't help but be inspired. And one of the things that Barbara Starfield showed was that Canada is not a particularly primary care-based system. And so we need to fix that. And there's pressure on us from the system, which is now struggling and in crisis, to actually, for family medicine to play a bigger role in the system so that it can evolve. And, if more people had a meaningful relationship with their family physicians, our emergency rooms wouldn't be in the trouble they're in. It's not the only problem. It's not the only solution, but it's a solution. And it's something that'll make a significant contribution. And that means that we have to learn to work in teams better, because you can't click your fingers and have a whole bunch of new family docs who are going to do this comprehensive care overnight. And lots of my colleagues have moved away from comprehensive care because of the challenges in doing comprehensive care in our system. So we need to do it differently, and that means doing teamwork. And it means us changing our approach to doing teamwork, which means that we have to be funded differently. So there are some solutions that I see, and I think we're heading in that direction, but it's going to take time, it's going to take energy, and strong leadership. And I'm doing my best to play my very small role as a researcher in that, and I write op-ed articles and I talk to my colleagues, but it's going to take leadership at a higher level that I'm at to bring about those changes.
Alan, it's always fascinating to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your past, your reflections on the community in which you live, and your thoughts for the future. And also for quietly telling us about your personal philosophy that has clearly drawn your whole life together. And that is, what did I do today that I could do better? Alan, thank you very much indeed. It's been such a pleasure.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Don.